Okay. Oh, what do we got? What's this? April Fools, I hope. Oh, that's a new agenda, huh? Oh my God. Oh my God. Look at that.
The real one's on it.
I'm gonna save that one.
Boy, you guys know how to get.
God, dude, I thought we were gonna have to call a medic.
Is this your idea?
Yeah. I like that.
The new guy, right?
Yeah. Oh, I like that.
I gotta remember this one. Oh my God. Oh my God.
That's a good one. That was all me. I forced Jeannie. I actually created it myself.
Oh, look at all, a whole bunch of things here. Oh, I didn't see it. Disco
I like the disco ball.
Oh, we should have had Shaw with this one here.
Yeah.
Home bills.
We'll show 'em at lunch.
To actually sunset. One of these things that pay for all public transit.
Yeah, there's certification of electricity cut to
Yeah, wait till she goes.
You have the real one, sir?
Yes, I got the real one. I
it.
hope
That was good.
Senator Chin.
Wow.
Hey, maybe that was an April Fool's joke we did at the end of the day yesterday.
Yeah, maybe.
Was that an early April Fool's joke?
Okay, all right, Jeannie, we're live.
We are.
Okay, oh boy. All right, well, good morning, everybody. It's April Fools, and we already got fooled, or I did. And it's Friday morning. It's the Senate Transportation Committee, and we're going to continue our discussion with Anthea and Chris as we were started yesterday, and we didn't get to some of it. So both of you would like to join us, whoever wants to go first.
I think I'm done.
Okay.
So you've now had a walkthrough of the full
Okay.
bill.
Is Jane here this morning? Nobody's here. Yes. She's around. She's going in there.
What was funny about that? Then they had referenced that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So I said, oh, there it is. I said, I think it down.
Mr. Chair, are you comfortable with walking through the hard copies I printed out the other day? Or would the committee rather me share my screen? I figured if these materials are on the website, but it might just be easier. Yeah.
Sheet.
Yep, those are it. Yep.
Okay. You had one that was pretty small.
And I made it a little bit bigger,
Okay.
so it'll be on legal size paper.
Okay, you got that one.
Yep, that's it.
That's it right here. Okay. We'll just give it a second for.
No problem.
Jane is here. Yeah, see here. Okay, that's right. Come on. We'll get started anyway. Okay, go right ahead, Chris.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chair. For the record, Chris, Joint Fiscal. Jeannie was kind enough to post 4 documents on the committee webpage under my name under today's date. But since you all have hard copies of those documents, which I've distributed to the committee, I guess on Wednesday or yesterday morning, it's all kind of blurring together at this point. Figured we should just work off maybe the hard copies because it's kind of easier to follow. But I just wanted to give you a sort of a familiarity with these charts and make sure you understand how to read them. I am starting with this giant piece of paper that's stapled on the first chart. Your counterparts in the other body refer to this as transportation on a page. And this is the 3rd document on the website under today's date for anybody following along online. But I just want to give you a sense of what this is. This sheet here shows you fund by fund what is in the House version for the transportation world. So the top box here that goes down to basically line 67 or so mostly corresponds to what's in your white book. But I lay this out a little bit differently than the agency does in its white book, because I try to make sure that this information also tracks how you all structure the appropriations in the big bill. And the most significant difference is sometimes the one-time appropriations that go to the agency are reflected in sort of the white book. I like to separate all the one-time stuff down to its own little box, beginning on row 70. Because when you all look at the big bill, the one-time appropriations are all dealt with in its own section of the budget. So that way you can go through this and sort of match everything up to where the appropriations lie in the big bill. So column A, all those B900 numbers, those will tie into which section of your budget bill appropriate these dollars. If you see a reference in column B to the T bill section, that means there is a language in your T bill that speaks to an adjustment in these numbers from what was in the governor's recommend. Or there may be an authorizing piece of authorizing language that was added to the T bill that speaks to like how those one-time dollars are being spent, for example. So this way you can sort of cross-reference between both bills which dollars are being dealt with in each section. One thing I really wanted to draw some attention to on this sheet is going down on starting in line 70 under the one-time appropriations, you'll see on line 72, DMV core system phase 2 IT project. I listed that on here so you knew that that project is proposed to be funded in the House budget, but I made a note here that in the House budget, the money actually gets routed through ADS, not through AOT. So in an earlier version of this, the money was in the governor's recommend, the money for that project was being routed through DMV. So I just want to make sure that you all still had a breadcrumb there and knew that that money is still in the budget, but it's being routed through a different department. The other thing I wanted to point out was on line 73, the EV charging infrastructure along highways. You see there's $2 million of federal money there. But if you go to section 2A of the T bill, which you see in column B there, you're not going to see a $2 million number. You're going to see a $6.25 million number. Why the discrepancy? I made a note on the far right there that that $6.25 million that you see in section 2A of the T bill, there's two pieces to it. One is $2 million of ARPA money, which is what you see on this line right here. But it also speaks to $4.25 million from the NEVI money that we're getting through the federal government. That money actually shows up in the policy and planning budget. So that's why the authorization speaks for 6.25, but this line only has $2 million because the other 4.25 is reflected elsewhere in the budget. You don't need to worry about that right now. I just wanted to draw your attention to the fact that there's a little note there off to the right that explains why if somebody goes to that section of the T bill, they're going to see a number that's different than 2 million.
So that on line 13 or no, line 27 of that 13.3 federal, the 1.2 is for the.
Just put it on the screen. Is that?
I can pull it up in the screen if you'd
Yeah, I
like.
think so.
Sure.
My glasses at home today. I'm sorry.
No problem. Give me just 1 second.
Appreciate it. Yes, right.
While you're bringing it up, the one question I had is, can you give me the reason why the House decided to route it through ADS, not DMV? What is the rationale for such a thing?
It had to do with, that's a great question. The funding source changed. So in the governor's recommend, the budget for the project was proposed to be spent from T fund dollars that would have been essentially freed up in the T fund from ending the JTOC transfer. So the governor's recommend proposed ending the JTOC transfer, shifting that $20.25 million that funds the state police over to the general fund, then use that 20.25 that would be left in the T fund to pay for the computer project. The House made a different decision. The House decided to maintain status quo with JTOC and instead shift this computer project over to ARPA for because the T fund dollars to spend it in the governor's recommend are no longer available. For administrative reasons, it was decided in the House to route the money through ADS rather than DMV because it was believed to be easier for ADS to centrally manage the ARPA funding. This funding source may change again through the appropriations process. So we should just put a pin in the fact that that may be something that might end up changing again between now and when the ink is dry on the budget.
Still got a fence around the police cars, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Nothing has changed with respect to that in the House passed budget. And my internet is running a little slow, Mr. Chair, but as soon as my Outlook opens, I will pull this up.
Do you want me to?
That would be great. Thank you, Anthea. I'm having issues in the Wi-Fi signal here today, but this would be a good segue to go to page 2 of this really, really big document. This one shows all the House changes to the governor's recommend. So the first page just shows you the as passed by House version. This chart shows you what the House changed, and it's all marked in red here. You can see here on line 20 and 21, there was a reduction of $54,000 from Program Development Administration. That money was moved down to the Town Highway Aid Program on line 66. So you recall when Anthea was walking through the T-bill a few days ago, she mentioned that due to some timing reasons, the CPI calculation for the Town Highway Aid formula needed to be corrected by 20 basis points. We needed to find $54,000 to bring the level up to what the statute says it should be. We consulted with the agency, and they suggested that we move that $54,000 out of the Program Development Administration line on line 20 down to the Town Highway Aid line on line 66. If you go down to Policy and Planning, line 28, you'll see the NEVI money. That's that $4.25 million we're getting from the infrastructure bill to build out electric vehicle charging infrastructure along the highway corridors. That $3,394,522 figure represents the increased federal appropriation to draw that money down. So that $4.25 million, that 3.3 number, or roughly 3.4, is about 80% of that total. The state share to draw down that money is already included in the base budget of that line. So that's why you don't see any change to the T-fund line, only to the federal line. And that's just to increase the authorization and appropriations in the big bill. So there's sufficient room to spend down the money that the agency is expecting to get from this new formula. This number was not included in the governor's recommend because we didn't have all the details of how much money we're going to get from this program at the time the governor's recommend was put together. So just due to timing reasons, some of these changes are due to the fact that we know a little bit more about the infrastructure bill money now than we did 3 months ago. So some changes are being made to accommodate the fact that we're learning more as we go. I'm going to skip over maintenance for right now and come back to it. Down to public transit in line 36, you'll see an increase of $1,933,000 of T-fund dollars. That total represents $1.433 million to continue zero fare operations on the urbanized transit routes, except for the Link Express commuter routes, plus an additional $500,000 of T-fund dollars for additional MTI grants. So that $1.933 million represents the total for those two pieces, which are increased above the governor's recommend in the public transit program.
That's very,
So on that point, do you anticipate problems if it were to be more flexible language saying this is additional money so they could cover if they wanted to go zero fare, but if 3 months in they really want to restore more service to permit the governing agency GMT to use the money instead to add more service?
And I think that's a policy decision for you all to make. These dollars, right now the language is in the House passed version of the T-bill. This language stipulates that the money is to be used to maintain zero fare operations. And the dollar figure that's associated with this was provided by GMT to the House Transportation Committee and represents the estimated cost of just the zero fare operations on the non-commuter urbanized routes. So I think it's a policy decision to be made on whether you all would like to agree with this or use that money to do something else. But right now, the language specifies that it's to be used to maintain those zero fare operations.
You understand where I was coming from? I just wasn't sure if there were grant strings or other money.
Not at this point, but again, the bill is still in development, so, you know.
In that same vein of where Senator Chittenden is, and I think I'm gonna get the same answer, if we want to use some of that money to upgrade the tickets and all that, so they can do that. And I'm sorry, I was listening to a conversation, I don't know if you brought that in on the end of the conversation, but that is probably the same way policy change, if we wanted to use that money to get them up and running so they can start collecting fares and the policy change.
For that, just Michelle mentioned yesterday, and I wasn't sure she was just listening now, but it's sort of important. The $1.4 million is exclusively transportation fund dollars. It could be that to do something else other than replacing fares, that there might be a different funding source for that, which would have more state transportation fund dollars go from.
Right. Yeah, that's an important point that, you know, when we talk about non-federal match, it doesn't mean it has to be from the T fund. You know, you can use other federal or non-federal sources to come up with that money.
I don't want to get too deep in the weeds on this as you're going over all this stuff, but while we're talking about that, I really would like to see them as quick as they can get back to collecting fares and whatever we need to do to help them to get there. If they say they don't have the money, I provide the money. And at the end of the day, it saves the state money by having them start to get back to pre-pandemic situations, places.
But as a former GMT chair, since I know the organization, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'd append to that. And what I'd say is I'm just most interested in giving them the ability as a board to have some routes be fare free, like the College Street Shuttle or the.
I get that, yeah.
Because there's just operational efficiencies for those high frequency urban ones.
I totally get that. I really do. I don't want to get into I don't want to get into having to be the manager of what works best for them. But at the overall thing, when they're coming back to us and they're cutting rides, very important routes because they don't have enough money. Let's get them generating money and so that we can get them whole again.
All right, okay.
All right, I'm down to line 50 now, town highway bridges. We spoke about this earlier this week whenever Anthea was going through the language of the T-bill. Remember that as part of the infrastructure bill, there's a brand new formula funding stream coming to states for bridges, exclusively for bridges. We are going to see a small state minimum of $225 million over 5 years through this bridge formula program. This funding stream has a requirement that at least 15% of the dollars are to be used for off-system bridges, which tend to be your lower volume town-maintained bridges. And the dollars can be used for up to 100% federal share on those off-system bridges. What the agency has proposed is taking some of this new money and plugging it into the White Book for FY23 and essentially shifting the construction costs of off-system town highway bridges from the current 80% federal, 10% state, 10% local arrangement to 100% federal for the construction phase.
So could you connect that, Chris, with what the House did to take some money from maintenance to give to towns?
Yep.
It seems like there's quite a bit, as you're talking about, going to towns now, and that would argue, do you need to even put more frosting on the cake, so to speak? What is the money being used for from that got moved out of maintenance? Is there a nexus between what that money would be used for in this?
There is, and Senator Mitchell, before you join here, I skipped over maintenance, so I'm going to circle back to that at the very end. Because no, that's okay, because I can explain how we got to that number through the maintenance, but I wanted to make sure we went through all the changes first. So we backed into it.
I guess what I'm saying, with all that additional federal money going in, it doesn't seem as compelling to add more money on the take more money out of the T fund and the match and with the pressure on it, in light of how much additional money is flowing out to towns.
I don't
Yeah.
want to.
And
Well, I know you don't, so that's part of what I'm suggesting is an argument that now's not the time to add more, to take money in the way that was being proposed, when in fact there's already 34 million or whatever that figure was, that's coming because of the federal slug.
sure, so right now in FY '23, we are expecting, and this shows up on line 52, $589,000 of savings to the towns. But most of that savings is gonna be to the 6 towns that have bridges that are already sort of in the pipeline right now. So one thing to sort of keep in mind with the bridge formula program is there's no question it has the potential to save towns their, typical 10% share for the cost of construction for their bridges. The impact of those dollars, though, will likely be limited to the towns that have projects in the book and in the prioritization
But
queue.
that's my point,
Yeah.
is that maybe how the House moved it out, some of that would be project specific as well. And if it's project specific, then only the towns that have those
Right.
projects are just the same as as you're saying that, well, only the towns that have those identified covered bridges or truss bridges would benefit. Well, as long as it's project specific, it's not all shall,
Right.
have prizes, so to speak.
Right.
So there you go, good.
Well, and to help with that argument as well, I mean, we have to be mindful about, we're not spending all the money we're getting this one year, this one biennium. I mean, we have massive amounts of money, correct, coming. I mean, they might not be, we don't have budgets for them, we don't know where they're gonna go and all of that stuff, so.
Over 5 years.
Over 5 years, so I mean, we don't have to try to fund everything this year. So if there's something that is important that they want to get to, well, we have, 4 more years after this to try to figure it out.
Michelle, right ahead.
I just want to clarify, and Chris can correct me if I'm not quite right on the details, but the new bridge programming for the off-system bridges that we put forth would cover the entire allocation for the period of the infrastructure bill, the 5 years.
Oh,
And so you're seeing, we're adding all the projects into the book. The numbers are only for the expenditures that are going to occur this year, but once they're in the book, we're going to be bringing them along with this funding source over the coming 5 years.
So you're saying your plan is obligated all the federal funds for these projects?
For the off-system bridge program, and while we're only saving, how much this year?
Saving $689 to the state, $589 to the towns.
I think the overall savings for the period of the infrastructure bill was about, you know how that number is?
Not at the top
I
of my
want to
head,
say
it's a lot more.
$8 million for the state, and then some, equivalent number for the towns. And so that's how we're, and then over the life, the towns are getting 40% of the funding. So I think, it was a way to leverage keeping more T funds and municipal funds in the case of those towns with this program and kind of setting the framework in place so we had stability for the program for the 5-year period.
Senator Moss.
Yes.
And my comment was more not project specific as to the point of that if it was that important, we have other pots of money, as we know that we can move around and we can do that. If this is a hugely successful program and we want to try to find some funding later on in year 5 or 4 or 3, that maybe we could possibly do that. So there's gonna be, not everybody's gonna get prizes, but this year, but they might next or the year after. If it's a successful project and popular.
Yeah, what I would suggest, and you really get it right, Senator Ingalls, is that by taking these projects and shifting them into this funding source, the typical town highway bridge program that we're paying for with federal funds is going to have that much more space to bring in town projects more quickly. They may not get the special discount and prize that everybody else is getting because they happen to be in the queue at this time and we need to program them, but it will provide more capacity as we move forward over the next 5 years.
Is it part of our policy intention to have a lot of this spent early on and then peter it out or wean them off of this so that there's not gonna be 5 years of heavy spending and then it all drops off?
That's why it's good to have it project specific. The big problem with taking it out of maintenance, it moves it into more of a base. Does it do that?
Getting back to removing funding from maintenance, in the agency's proposal, we didn't move any of the town highway bridge money. So basically what's happened is, last year you told us come in at these specific levels for town highway roadway and town highway bridge. And when we calculated the budget for those levels, we included the carry forward that was left on the bottom line and did not come in with a budget proposal at the specific numbers, but one that considered the carry forward that had not been implemented yet. And so that's where these two amounts that are being carved off of maintenance to make those two programs whole is coming from.
And just to talk a little bit more about that, I don't want to get ahead of the horse here. But it would be helpful as we look at these things and go down the road, and I'm not trying to pin the governor into a position or pin an agency into a position, but are we going to, for the next 5 years, still going to have an extra $100 million for paving? Are we going to, in these monies, so as Senator Chittenden said, are we trying to spend the big pot of money right now that's available to us, or can we expect better than greater budgets for the next 5 years at a 30% or 40% higher than where we've been? I see that our transportation budget, I think, is 30% or better above where we were previously. So are those the type of figures that we can sit here and plan for without being specific to projects, that we can figure out how to, where we're going to be? Is that the type of money that we can expect for the next 5 years?
Yes, Senator Ingalls. What happens is the federal infrastructure bill brought about 53% more federal money than we have typically experienced. And we only get those in buckets over the years, and the amount actually goes up a little bit each year. And so we're programming to the full federal availability in FY23, and we actually have the transportation funds to pull down all the fully available funds. Next year, we'll have a little bit more federal funding and so on, but next year and the years after, 24 through 26 or 7, we don't have enough T fund. We're in, the $60 to $80 million short of T funds to be able to pull down all the federal money we need. So we may have the ability to do more, but we may not have the money to get the federal funds to do it.
And the last part that I want to get to, and I promise, and then we can move on until I think of something different. But no, my point, this is where I really want to get to. Because if it is going to peter out, but we still have that money, that we don't have to spend that bucket right now, it would just make sense to me sometimes that, okay, well, at the end of years 4 or 5, we don't have any extra monies for paving. Well, if we could just hold off on some of those paving projects, move it down the list a little bit, when and if prices come down a little bit, maybe we could get another 100 miles done more with that money than what we could get done right now. And I know that's not what everybody wants to hear, but I'm just trying to strategically think and about how we budget this stuff to get the biggest bang for our dollars. Because you're going to hear me repeatedly say that I want these monies to be more transformational than anything that we've ever had before, because we won't have the opportunity again.
Senator Ingalls, we are on exactly the same page, and that's how we're programming out. And we're going to have more money every year going forward through the life of the bill, and we'll be able to do more paving, similar year by year, expanding a little bit each year.
Okay.
You're on the same page, I like that.
Well, maybe.
Except the challenge is going to be the match.
Yes.
That's the whole thing. It's contingent on the match.
Exactly.
So one of the other options with all this money, and that is, I don't know, do we do like we talked about yesterday, and money's available for X, Y, Z, and the towns could use that as an opportunity. In other words, can we use this more as a state local approach toward drawing down those federal dollars, and the communities could say, yeah, we're willing to put the match because this is to our advantage to get this particular project or work done. So I think sometimes we just look at, within the context of the T fund, but your comment yesterday about when we were agonizing over the intent language. You said, well, we could move it out to grants and the towns could, and I would think we could, for some of the money, not return it, but say, look, you know, you've probably got some deferred projects here. And if you can do it for a 20% match or whatever it might be, it's to your advantage to, you know, pony up a little.
Yeah, and then looking, yes, exactly. We did that in the town that I was in where we only had so much pavement budget. And I said, listen, it's not gonna, we're not gonna be able to, those roads aren't gonna last for another 7 years. We gotta figure out how to do this now in this one cycle. And then back to the match part of it is looking further down the road to move this monies around so we can keep more of our match money and find ways to get the government to use that lot of money that the government's given us to do these projects.
Interesting.
Yes.
You derailed your presentation.
That's okay.
I'm pulling one thread in that conversation. I think I just heard you say that we're looking at a $50 to $60 million shortfall of T-fund dollars to match federal funds over the next 5 years. And I wonder with fees, do fees go into the T-fund? So if we pushed on the governor to recognize that we need to adjust our fees relatively.
I think that's gonna be next year.
Yeah.
It's too late this year because the fee bill has to start in the House. But I think the language and everybody, and that's why I said last year, we had language in the budget to give us an estimate of what would be the revenues associated with the fees that haven't been raised for 5 years. And that was millions and millions of dollars. That was over 20 million. And over, I don't remember how much just in transportation.
It was about 14 million.
14, 15 in transportation. So that absolutely is gonna have to be looked at as part of the solution to.
Senator Chin is proposing a 25 cents a gallon tax on gas.
So if anybody here has the ear of the governor and probably gonna run for re-election and wants to start tilling the soil on it.
That would hit the south.
Actually, I think didn't the House Transportation did talk about that for quite a bit, but it was too late in the process. So I think it's gonna be something that'll be right there. If the governor doesn't propose it, there will be an effort to recognize that that policy has having a significant impact on funds in and the ability to leverage the federal dollars.
I just also think it's sound policy. We need to relatively adjust these things for inflation as
Well, that's been our practice.
Yeah. We've done that for years.
Because, you know, we had, when we looked at certain motor vehicle fees, they hadn't been increased since the 90s. We had travel.
Driver's license, all that.
We had travel trailers, you
Right,
know,
yeah, yeah.
motorhomes,
Motorhomes are
that
getting
were-
nothing.
nothing. They were,
They
the
pay $100 a
registration
year or
fee was
something.
nothing. And so we had gotten into that regular update. And the advantage of it, of course, is it kept the increases really modest because it was, but the longer you leave it and then you adjust, then people are gonna really see it.
Yeah, so you can break it.
And this is an excellent line of questioning, Senator Chittenden, and I just want to direct members that the fee report, the executive branch fee report that Senator Kitchell alluded to is posted on the JFO website under transportation. It's like one page. When I talk about a report, it's really, really short.
I think I brought a copy in. Didn't I share?
You probably did, and I uploaded it as well, so people had it somewhere central. But that report just speaks to the fees that typically bring in $1 million or more a year.
Well, we didn't want to
Correct.
make it so burdensome, so we said, give us the major fees.
And the major ones, you know, just indexing them to CPI from
Nobody got
2016.
hurt bad. It's just.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
And based on the way the CPI has been over the last year or so, I expect next year's fee report will show a substantially higher number.
And I think it makes, I think Senator Mazza brought it up that, you know, when they discussed this the other day, that a lot of people just don't really notice a couple bucks here, a couple bucks there. But if you do that and you put a purpose to it, maybe you don't want to draw attention to it at all. But if you do want to draw attention to it and say, well, listen, these are the monies that we're going to put a fence around, like we have with the other parts of some of like the police cars and all that, put a fence around and say, we're going to use this to use monies to match some of these programs that we want to get done that we might not have enough state monies to match.
If I asked anyone today what their car registration is, half the people couldn't tell you because it happens once a year. It's $76 or $78. It doesn't. It's not.
It doesn't
It's
matter.
not every day that you run across this.
And so this idea that not to increase them, people are gonna stand up and applaud us. They
No.
don't even know it,
No,
it's
they
like
don't
a
know.
submarine,
They have no
it's
idea.
just, but when you add it all up, the revenue impact to the T fund, which has always been sort of that user approach, it does make quite a difference, and so $15 million this year, next year will be more. So I think it has to come.
Well, I know in business, as far as in mine as well, is that you have incremental raises every year and leases and stuff like that. So that at the end of 5 years, that person still wants to stay with you. They don't see a $500 increase in
Like
that.
that poor lady you were talking about.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta see the price of groceries, what's happening. Mayonnaise, I told you, that's a quart of Hellman's mayonnaise, $2.50.
That's only a store keeper want to retire earlier, but.
I can't believe it, I was shocked when it came in.
Oh.
And, this week, everything's coming in is up because of trucking, diesel. The prices are just crazy.
Oh, I need to call the trucking company, I have a delivery to try to get hold of me.
Well, you better increase your rates will be higher.
Well,
Have you got any packages, you see or something, you see what the package prices is for.
no, I'm.
Okay, Chris, go right ahead, sorry.
Oh, I'm almost done here.
Storing a house.
So line 54 and line 58, town structures on the class 2 roadway, those changes you've heard about, those were the house, whenever you all passed last year's T-bill, there was language in that T-bill that said beginning in FY23, the agency was to make a minimum of $7.2 million and $8.6 million respectively of grant awards to towns, beginning in FY23. The numbers that were included in the governor's recommend did not reflect those statutory changes. And as you heard from Director Boomhauer, I believe, and I don't speak for the agency, but I believe the agency's intent was to use some carry forward funds to help meet the statutory intent and sort of bridge that delta between the number in the governor's recommend and the number in last year's T-bill. House Transportation decided instead to have the number reflect the number that was in last year's T-bill, which required roughly $1.8 million of T-fund to be shifted over. Again, if carry forward was sort of presumed to be used to bridge that gap, conceivably that carry forward could be reverted and be reappropriated in BAA, for example, and sort of end up at a wash in the end. But I believe the House Transportation's intent was they wanted to have the number reflect the number that they enacted in last year's T-bill. That's why you see those adjustments. The last adjustment in the B900 section.
So it's a distinction without a difference in the end. It's just how it gets expressed.
I think there are multiple avenues that the numbers can get sorted out by the agency through the
Do you have a
BAA
position
process.
on that?
I think given the further clarity relative to whether or not the agency can count the carry forward that doesn't get expended in those two programs in the next budget cycle would be helpful.
Seems like we could do that.
We can draft that, and then I would not pull from the maintenance.
Yeah.
Want me to oversend that?
Well, it's taking carry forward, which is available funding, and rather than reducing the maintenance appropriation, I would find that much more desirable,
Carry forward from where? I'm sorry.
unexpended from.
The prior year. So for these,
Total or just the maintenance?
from these town highway class 2 and town highway bridge programs.
So we would fund the increase to the, using the percentages and meet that requirement and use it, fund it through carry forward and not out of the maintenance. So you don't have to reduce the maintenance by that amount. So you're meeting. Yeah,
Where was that carry forward otherwise going to be allocated to?
oh, I could find lots of places.
I don't know
That's where it does.
how that works. I'm not the CFO. I know enough to know that this was Chris may like be able to.
I think at the end of the day, this is a question for the agency on how they were planning to do the carry forward, but I think there's multiple ways you can do this. You can either do this in this bill or in the big bill, or you make these adjustments at BAA. So having it might be a little easier from an administrative perspective to deal with carry forwards and reversions and whatnot at BAA, because at that point you've closed the fiscal year and you really do have a clear sense of exactly how much carry forward you will have at the end of FY22. So in the interest of not overcomplicating it, it may be a smoother path forward to proceed with a funding level that you would envision wanting them to stick to in the big bill, and then for FY23, and then addressing the carry forwards and reversions once FY22 closes.
And if you're gonna do that and you're comfortable having those programs through to the end of the fiscal year, like in this bill, staying at the amounts that the agency proposed, you could restore the maintenance budget and just have the 7.2 and the 8.6 not be at 7.2 and 8.6. It was important to have transportation that they be at 7.2 and 8.6. You would just through the T-bill last year said you wanted more money to go out in those 2 grant programs, and then to see it lower in the white book, I think was something that for municipalities was important that those were at the amount that was supposed to be.
And my final note on this quick section is you see that $54,000 increase to the town highway 8 on line 66, which we already talked about, was that moving out of program development down there just to fix a mathematical error in the formula calculation. What's really important here is line 82 and 83, column A. You see that with all these adjustments between the governor's recommend and the House passed version, you're spending the same amount of T-fund dollars. So that could be a good segue into the maintenance piece, which I glossed over and said we'd get to at the end. I could draw your attention to this shorter document that hopefully is easier to see now that I blew the fonts up than my first version. This shows you all the House money changes sort of within the white book on one sheet. And with a little explanatory note that I already walked through all this, but at the end of the day, the maintenance reduction, that $3.06 million reduction, was backed into by adding all these changes up to the T fund and figuring out what's the delta, what do we need to take from somewhere to make sure we're spending the same amount of T fund dollars that we have available in the governor's recommend. So it all gets balanced out in maintenance with 3.06 million. Why did the House choose maintenance as the placeholder for this? Maintenance is the area of the budget that is almost entirely funded by T fund dollars.
So why do you rob banks? That's
Where the money is. So it's almost entirely T fund dollars, and it's not tied up with specific projects. So if you were, for example, to go to the program.
It's a stealth attack so that it doesn't say, well, we just took your project off the list, out of the plan. Exactly,
and also, when you think about matches and to find $3 million of T fund, you need to cut $15 million worth of projects. So maintenance is one of those areas where some years you have a little bit more expenditures.
It makes it very vulnerable to go and.
It does. There's also an area of maintenance has some carry forward in there too, and they've got some margin that there are very much areas of concern in maintenance where the fact that fuel costs are going up, bid costs are going up. Some of these bids coming back are significantly higher than what the agency expected. Labor costs are a really big piece of the maintenance budget. Salt prices are going up. There's a lot of inflationary pressures there.
So wait till next year.
So that would argue that you do not want to go there because of all these known additional pressures.
Yes, and I would also argue that maintenance is an area that there is some flexibility, but not a lot of flexibility. So this is an area where you don't want to take an axe to it, you might want to take a scalpel to it. And it's an area where expenses can sometimes be unpredictable from year to year. And it's an area where if you were to make a modest adjustment, I'm trying to be very neutral with how I phrase this. If you were to choose to make a modest adjustment in that line, while the agency may not find that desirable, the agency may be able to manage it through the regular budget process and make adjustments at BAA mid-year without disrupting projects. Because sometimes you might have some savings show up on a line where, at the end of FY22 that you weren't expecting, Costs might have come in lower than you thought, your revenues might have been a little better than you thought. As long as you make an adjustment that's sort of within the range of what's reasonable to manage, I do have confidence in the agency's ability to manage it.
So I'd be curious if you think 3 million is within that range, but I'd also want to put on the table an argument I've heard, probably why the House did this. We are projecting an unspent $5 million in maintenance this year. Is that correct?
I don't know if we have a,
They can spend it all. No.
I don't think we know yet.
They got project money.
Yeah, salt. I thought the salt, didn't we underspend on salt by 5 million?
Oh, you're
But
talking
what
about
you
winter
make on your peanuts,
That's
you lose on
different.
your bananas.
Yeah, winter maintenance fluctuates. Some years we're 21 million and I mean. it
But
goes
then that
all
means they can do more replacement of guardrails
Yes.
or, whatever. So it's all,
a lot of people get confused on winter maintenance. Yeah, you have a mild winter, you get back to money, but there's a ton of maintenance, whether it's culverts or whether it's not culverts, guardrails and everything else that goes into maintenance. It's not just winter maintenance. Because a snowstorm may cost about $1 million in a bad storm. I mean, that's,
everything is a trade-off.
yeah, you gotta.
I was just wondering if we have a history of over budgeting for maintenance and not spending it.
No, there's no such thing as over budgeting for maintenance.
I think there's no shortage of maintenance needs or ways that the agency can think of, very important ways to spend those dollars maintaining the system. I think it's just a matter of sometimes your really core needs and your expenses fluctuate a little bit from year to year. And those aren't always the
I
easiest
want to
things
do
to
away with
predict.
front plates, save a lot of money because they don't use them anymore. Nobody has bigger drums anymore. Why would you use them? Every time I mention it, yes.
So Senator Mazzei, I wanted to sort of re-emphasize Bradley's point, which, not Bradley, sorry.
Because who's Bradley?
Bradley's CFO.
Oh, right.
I'm in the money world.
Chris doesn't work for you.
I know.
I didn't know if it was Bradley Rupert, the famous movie star. Oh, Cooper, I'm sorry.
Hey, give her a break for me.
Yeah.
She was in here yesterday.
Yeah, she was here late after everybody's gone home.
So what I want to point out about one of the really important things that the maintenance budget does after we know how the winter went and if we have any funds available is we do district leveling. And that's where we go out and put a skim coat on places that are really bad that we're not going to be able to get to for a while. And what I would say about where are we going to get with all this great new paving dollars that we're going to have under IIJA is not very far because bids have been coming in 30 to 40% higher than we had, originally anticipated. So we'll be fortunate, depending on where things go, just to maintain being at 2/3 of what we need for maintaining the system in a state of good repair, based on inflation right now. It's a really
And that's discouraging.
disturbing, very disturbing.
It is frightening what this is gonna cost us inflation bit. I bet you when the trucks go out for a snowstorm now, I wouldn't be surprised to another $50,000 just for fuel or I'd be curious because look what happens, $5 is something for diesel fuel. That's just one item. Tires, you can't buy tires. I said that the other day, you're not gonna buy tires.
Can't buy cat food.
You
I
can't
mean,
buy
little things coming doing that.
And Senator Mazza, that's a really interesting point too. And, we talk a lot about how much additional money is coming to states through this bill, but, think about the impact of a couple years of compound inflationary pressures at the rate we've been seeing. And that additional buying power gets eroded real fast.
My prediction is there's 153 million of paving this year, and I would be pleased if we did around 100 million, like we used to do, about 103
You
million
got
a
as
year.
much.
If we get that, we're gonna be lucky, but yet there was 153 million, which is gonna do a lot more. But you wait till the bids come out on paving this year, you're gonna see
No,
figures that are gonna blow your
that's
mind.
what did you say? They're showing 30?
30 to 40% higher.
Yeah.
Is that right? Oh, yeah, I believe it, because number one, they can't get help, they're paying them all kinds of money. I was talking to a trucker the other day, he asked his people, what do you want an hour? But don't tell your other partner, because that's what they're gonna do, if you want help. Plus diesel, plus everything else, the repairs. So I would be pleased to see $103 million of the paving come out of $153 million. That's what's gonna happen, and it may get worse, who knows? I mean, I've been here a long time, I've never seen uncertain times like this one, this is crazy. The whole country, the whole country's falling apart.
Yeah, and Senator Mazza, one sort of interesting point is, we're dealing with a lot of cyclical and unprecedented inflationary pressures on things like fuel prices that we're looking at, commodity prices. Some of that is, due to the fact that it's really hard to wake up an economy globally after it's been put to sleep from a pandemic. But there's also going to be some impacts here that are not likely going to be as transitory as others. So some of the pressures on the wage scale, for example, and the labor costs are likely, they're likely going to last. And,
Oh, they're not gonna go back to the old way.
right.
Once you give, you can't take.
They're going to keep going. They're going to keep going. And, I think when you start talking about these kind of projects, people talk about the only two sort of guarantees in life are death and taxes. Well, I'd add a third one, and it's that, whenever you delay a project, it very rarely gets cheaper to do it in the future. Things get worse, things deteriorate over time, and it's always more expensive to replace something in the future than to repair it now. So there are always trade-offs with all of this, and it is not inconsequential to just delay things because the short-term decisions that are made have long-term repercussions. The last thing I want to mention on this chart is just the one-time appropriations. Down on page 86, that little block there, the red text shows you what changed and the black text shows you what was in the governor's recommend. So this is already summarized on the first chart, but I just want to walk you through the changes that were made. Changes were not made to most of the dollar amounts, but some changes were made to the funding sources. So as I mentioned earlier, you see on line 87, that DMV Phase 2 IT project. The governor's recommend proposed funding that project out of the T fund using the freed up money from ending the JTOC transfer. The House instead decided to maintain the JTOC transfer and shift the project over to federal ARPA dollars. They also changed the funding source from going through DMV to through ADS. So that note is over there on the right, and that is why you see that number change there. The House also declined to fund the $1,050,000 to VAST, which you see on lines 89 and 91. So you see that I've zeroed those out. That was proposed to come from general fund, and now those are not proposed to be funded.
In the House.
Correct, in the House. In line 93, the House made no changes to the governor's recommend of spending $2 million of ARPA on additional EV charging infrastructure along highways. So there's no change there. All of the other sections you see here, from line 94 down to line 104, these are what I refer to as the purchase incentives for people to obtain electric vehicles and more high efficiency used vehicles in the case of Mileage Smart and shifting your mode of transportation with Replace Your Ride. All of these amounts were originally proposed to be funded with ARPA in the governor's recommend. But on further review of the ARPA rule and some further discussion with Ledge Council and others, the House felt that these items are not as good of a fit to fund out of ARPA. So instead, they proposed the same amounts as in the governor's recommend, but shifted them all over to general fund. General fund has more flexibility, obviously, and it doesn't carry the compliance risk that using federal dollars might. So the House didn't make any changes to the amounts, but they shifted those costs from the federal ARPA dollars over to the general fund. Lastly, line 114 just shows you the JTOC was restored. So that comes back out of the T fund in the House passed version. House made no changes to the other transfers we typically see by statute for going to the recreation trails fund and things like that. That stuff happens normally. And at the end of the day, everything sort of sums up at the end at the bottom there. And again, the House passed version spends the same amount of T fund dollars as the governor's recommend. The final page, which I wasn't planning to spend a lot of time on unless you want to, just shows you the changes from your as passed FY22 against the FY23 governor's recommend and the House passed version. Again, this is just an all fund summary that shows you how the totals have changed. I can print off all kinds of really crazy spreadsheets that show you the fund by funds comparison too, if you want. But I'm trying to keep everything on one. I'm trying to keep everything on one page, and even with that, I've gone on to 4.
I like that.
But this just shows you the changes.
Chris, you have to understand that that's what we rely on the House. They only have one committee, and they have twice the number of people to chew on it, so, we will rely on.
Michelle's always disappointed, she doesn't spend as much time as she does in the house.
Oh my
And I'm
God.
not gonna lead you
Spend the whole
down,
morning on, you know,
I'm not gonna lead you down this rabbit hole unless you want to,
no,
but
I don't.
this chart just shows you the year-over-year comparisons. Again, you know, a lot of this stuff, especially in program development, which is where you see the bulk of the sort of core AOT expenditures happening. A lot of those big percentage increases you see are due to this additional federal money coming in. And a lot of this is really project driven.
Like
So-
96.7%, that's
Yes.
kind of, is that what you're?
Which line are you on?
Oh, I'm on town highway.
Yes, that's because there are more projects in the pipeline.
Well, I mean, you were talking about big
Yep.
percentages, that one does stand out.
Paving is another big one on line 12. Interstate Bridge is a big one as well.
Mhm.
Project driven. You'll also see some things that, you know, you might see a big decrease. So if you look at Park and Ride, pretty good decrease there. That's because they finished a, you know, they have finished some, or no, excuse me, rest areas rather, the $71.3 million reduction, line 26. They finished the Sharon paving project. So, you know, you have had a big project in the queue in FY '22. It's not going to be in the queue in FY
What
'23.
is traffic and safety and program development? Is that like traffic lights and roundabouts and? I
Yeah,
don't
those
know.
big billboards on these interstate
Oh.
flash things.
Michelle, have bids went out for paving yet?
Yes,
Any coming back?
I'm sure they are coming back.
Curious.
Yeah, I mean, this is where I'm mentioning that we're
Yeah,
seeing
yeah.
these increases for both small jobs and big
Okay, I'm
jobs.
just curious to see if, I know they usually go out this time of year pretty soon, so
Yeah,
That's,
just see how the trend's going.
well,
If you hear about it. just-
yeah, I'll see what I
Yeah,
can find
just-
out for
just-
now
just
and
Curious to see what's happening.
have them talk about that next week.
Because it is getting paving time, it's starting pretty soon.
well, they like it, but I thought you said the ones that have come back are already at 30% higher.
30 to 40, yeah.
Well, now they gotta delay it safe because they don't know what the future of the fuel is gonna be.
Well, they usually don't, they have a clause that gives protection around petroleum
increase the
costs.
rate.
Isn't there some corridor
They're
there
probably gonna have to.
up or down? And the
Yeah,
contracts are recognized.
I believe so.
Because even the paving people themselves, they're not gonna quote a price for the whole summer.
That's the whole situation. yeah.
Or they want to have an adjustment factor.
You gotta call Chip Whitcomb and ask him what he's. Okay, yes, go ahead.
Chris, just one more thing, I know you probably covered it here already, and just remind me again, there's just a lot of numbers going around. Lines on the last page, lines 46 and lines 48,
Yeah.
the highway, the town highway structures, town highway class 2 road programs, just hit me again with that, please.
Sure.
It will sink in.
No, great question. In FY '21, the grant activity for these two lines was paused. And there was a one-time increase, I believe, in town highway aid that year
3
to
million.
make up for it.
Okay.
In FY '22, the amounts were then doubled to make up for that pause in the previous year. So that 12.6 and 15.297 there you see on line 48, that represents the doubled amount for that 1 year.
Okay.
The numbers in the governor's recommend that column D then revert back to sort of what the baseline numbers are, or were, I should say. And then the House adjustments increased those sort of pre-pandemic baseline numbers up to the FY '23 levels that were enacted in last year's T-bill. So that's why you see that really weird, the sort of big number you see in FY '22 is not the normal number. That represents the one-time doubling after the one-time year of pausing.
And maybe you both know this or whatever, but are we up at like 2.4% what the towns are getting over what they were last year?
2.7 in the formula. You see that on line 54. And again, that doesn't factor in that one-time $3 million increase to town highway aid last year. So if you're just looking at the base formula amount, it increases 2.7% in the House passed version. And that reflects the sort of hokey calculation you have to do by statute when doing the CPI adjustment. I fully expect that the increase would be larger next year because you have to do the CPI calculation based on your two most recently completed fiscal years. And inflation has gone up quite a bit.
I think that inflation was so bad at 82. They go back, and of course, if you want to see fuel inflation, remember when we had the oil embargo and the lines for
My parents bought their first house in 1980. I wasn't, but when my parents bought their first house in 82,
You know,
their
I was
mortgage
gonna
was
say-
18%.
Yeah, that's right, percentages are right to the roof.
Yeah, but
The
you
real
weren't
estate
born
people
then.
make a lot of money.
I wasn't even a twinkle in their eye then.
Yeah, sure is.
So the 889, 866, and the 951 that they added, they named the house. They calculated that based on the formula, basically.
Those are not done by formula. The 866 and 951 are based on statute. So the statute, the T-bill you passed last year said no less than 7.2 and 8.6 respectively in grant awards. Those change numbers just represent the delta between the number in the governor's recommend and the number that was in the T-bill from last year. To take
And
effect
then
this
was
year.
that the conversation earlier about the carry forward?
Yes.
So there is that in the carry forward. And you would normally likely carry it forward into the same program. Anyway,
Yeah.
and why is there carry forward? Just like projects came under or didn't get built?
Yeah, so historically, what you would have seen, Senator Perchlik, is in particular in the town highway bridge program, there can be like a significant buildup carry forward over time because projects take longer to implement than was anticipated. Rather than like, just not implementing that money in some other way, recognizing like we've made a commitment to all the projects and we're going to do them. We're trying to sort of recognize the cost of the projects that we have agreed to and within the formula granted out are going to be within that particular time frame.
Our interest rate center goes on houses now.
They're actually just starting to creep up over the 4%, 4.25, 4.3.
They were down at 2 or something.
They were down to like, well, we had some as low as 2.3
Wow.
like over a year ago, and then they were right at 2.85, 2.75, 2.85, and but yeah, now they've gone. They actually kind of skipped right through the 3s and gone to the 4s.
Yes, go ahead.
Another question for Michelle. We talked about the garage at the Rutland Airport, the snow removal garage that's been postponed. Is that an example of why you would have a carry forward? Because I was in, I guess it was not, we took it out of the FY22 budget. It would be an FY23 budget, but it may not. If it doesn't get built, then that would be a carry forward into the, or it's still in the FY23 budget.
Yes, that's a case where currently we had bids come in well in excess of what we would anticipate beyond inflation. And so we're kind of back to the drawing board on understanding how we might rebid that project.
So that you still might just rebuild it. So it might still happen in FY23.
Yeah, Sarah, unfortunately, one other sort of just overall reason why carry forward is awfully common is think about the fact that our fiscal years end and begin right in the middle of the construction season.
Right.
And the federal fiscal years are on a completely different cycle than the state fiscal years. So there's always a little bit of margin there between when you think you're going to be spending the money and when you actually spend the money.
Fix that.
How? Is there a language that you can propose?
Fiscal year, the line of the federal runs it.
We had the same thing in our town as well. We had this budget of about $400,000 that we had to use, or you probably had it too, before the taxes came in. You still had your bills coming in, but before your new taxes came in, you just had to use that money. And we had built that money up over years of time, so we didn't have to borrow it. And every year you get people coming, why do you have that $400,000 just sitting there?
You have that for state budgets and for the T fund as well. It's a stabilization fund
Yeah.
that you have to carry, and that's noted for that very reason, so that you don't go into the deficit. You've
Right.
got money there for things that might have been totally unanticipated.
And this is something every government deals with. And Vermont, to Senator Mitchell's point, Vermont is very fortunate that it has its stabilization reserves because a lot of other states don't have that type of system. And that's sort of a
We have it
way.
in the ed fund, we have general fund, and the T fund, all have stabilization reserves.
And in the absence of that, you have to go to the bond market and do short-term borrowing at a cost, obviously.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
I had nothing else to cover with my charts unless you all have questions, and I'm happy to answer.
we're gonna take a little break and we'll get back on. So we'll take a 10-minute break, please.
When we come back, we're taking up the bill, force all bills with sunset provisions, statute